Why isn't minimum wage pegged to inflation? The people who make minimum wage laws basically only do so amidst public demand. And their benefactors in the business world have succeeded in telling people that a hike in minimum wage will actually increase inflation. In some states, as well as some other countries, minimum wage is pegged to some measure of inflation. Specifically, the states with some tie of inflation, cost of living to minimum wage are Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, D.C., Florida, Maine, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, only until $15 is reached, Ohio, Oregon, South Dakota, Vermont, and Washington. In Canada, the minimum wage is pegged to inflation in most provinces. They announce the increase in April after annual inflation data comes out, and then 6 months later, in October, the minimum wage is raised. This year it's being raised by 50 cents to $15.50 per hour. $14.60 per hour for teenagers. It works really well, and it was actually reintroduced by our Conservative Party after the Liberals increased the minimum wage by $4 in the span of like 2 years. The Conservatives said the new system was fair for workers and employers because it gave them predictability. They know how much the minimum wage will increase and when. It's not a surprise. Minimum wage really needs to be a state-by-state or even county-by-county thing, not a national thing. If you set minimum wage at for someplace like LA or Chicago, you're going to starve out places where everything is cheaper, and the big chains are going to fill those places up. Because that would mean fixing the problem, and fixed problems don't get votes. More like minimum wage is pegged by inflation. Because then employers would have to pay people enough to live on. The people making the laws aren't interested. It's that simple. Most other wages aren't. It's not pegged to inflation because there isn't the political will to do that. There are plenty in Congress that would be just fine with a very low minimum wage, or even removing it entirely. As such, it's a giant fight just to get it raised from time to time, let alone for a permanent change like pegging it to inflation. I'm pretty sure that raising minimum wage can make inflation worse IRC, and you end up on a weird loop. Just think. Minimum wage goes up, so companies are paying employees more. To make up for it, they either have to up the prices of their goods, services, or they have to lay off workers. If too many companies choose to increase prices, especially for things like food, then the general cost of living spikes and minimum wage won't be enough for people to get by. So it goes up again. And away this spiral goes. Not an economist. IDFK what I'm talking about when it comes to money. Just my train of thought and my own 2 cents on the matter. It is in a lot of countries. Here in Belgium, for instance, there is basically a big long list of products and the minimum wage. And the government wage brackets basically follow that. But it appears in the US there is no political will for it. At one point in the US our minimum wage was rising mostly in match with inflation. That stopped in the 90s. As for why it isn't, you're essentially paying your employees less and less every year if you can avoid increasing the minimum wage around inflation. So there is to some degree a lot of incentive for businesses to fight to keep the minimum wage the same. Artificially raising wages contributes to inflation. It would be a circular issue. I don't want to point fingers, but at this point we all know who's responsible. Because multiple things are causing inflation right now. Supply chain issues, the Federal Reserve, employment, the post-COVID economy, war, and several other things. You should watch the John Oliver episode on it. There's no one cause. Because anyone who makes more money than you wants to keep it that way. Capitalism and corruption. Because not pegging at inflation means that the people who make the rules, employers and the politicians that have client-patron relationships with, don't have to pay laborers as much. It's pretty straightforward.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.